Right, let's continue to get your reaction on the latest crime statistics. I'm joined by Mpiwa, Mangwiro-Tsanga, Regional Campaigns and Advocacy Specialist for Sonke Gender Justice, as well as Andrew Faull, Senior Researcher at the Justice and Violence Prevention Institute for Security Studies. A very good afternoon to both our guests, and thank you very much for joining us. Andrew, let me start with you. Much fanfare is made every year in terms of the release of the crime statistics. Why is this so important?
Thank you very much for having me. Without knowing what is happening, it's hard for us to know whether we're making progress or where we should be focusing our resources. So this data is vital. However, as many of us have been saying for more than a decade, the data that comes out once a year is always at least 6 months old. So it's very heartening that the Minister announced today that quarterly data will be released from as early as a few weeks' time, which will empower everyday citizens, the private sector, local government, municipalities, provincial government to play a much bigger role, partnering with the SAPS to keep themselves safe and intervene where intervention is most necessary.
And not a very pretty picture was painted this afternoon. You believe more targeted intervention is needed, meaning?
Meaning that every year we see that roughly 2.5% of police stations account for 20% of all murder in the country, and about 13% of stations account for 50% of all murder. Within those stations, between 50 and 70% of murder takes place over weekends, and in particular sub-regions of police precincts. So we know that being very targeted and specific in how we deploy our policing research resources and our other violence prevention interventions can significantly reduce murder in the short term. Of course, we need to address the massive structural inequality, the difficulty of life for most South Africans in the long run, but we can significantly bring down everyday violence and the weekend murders that we see by being targeted. And in that regard, I just want to refer to what your reporter said earlier about daily rapes and daily murder rates. Those are averages, but the reality is most of these harms don't take place in neat daily categories. They are very clustered, and most of those clusters can be identified, and that's where we need to intervene.
Let's introduce into the conversation Mpiwa Mangwiro-Tsanga, Regional Campaigns and Advocacy Specialist with Sonke Gender Justice. When you look at the statistics where rape is concerned in the country, increasing by 312 cases compared to the year before and bringing the total to 7,749 cases, what does this tell you about the kind of society that we are? Mpiwa, it's Dudu. Are you still there?
Hello. Sorry, there was a break, but I'm here.
No problem. When you look at the statistics where rape is concerned in the country, what does it tell you about the kind of society that we are?
It tells us that we are living in a broken society, a society in which women, predominantly women and girls, have to live in fear for their lives. We are living in a society where personal security is not guaranteed.
And Andrew, gang violence, vigilantism are also increasing. So where vigilantism is concerned, it accounted for 13%. And then you're seeing that armed robberies, 11%, gang-related violence, 905 killings, accounting for those killings. It would seem that whichever many campaigns that we are having and the communication around these issues is not really making an impact. Is that a fair assessment?
It's difficult to say what is having an impact and what isn't. I think what we need to recognize from the SAPS's analysis of the causes of murder in particular is that interpersonal violence remains the most common cause of harm. So domestic violence, arguments between people who know each other, revenge or jealousy attacks between people who know each other. These are the causes that the SAPS identifies as most commonly being behind murder, attempted murder, and many assaults. So the idea that we need to be afraid of the stranger in our community or the stranger as we walk down the road needs to be shifted. It is those people who we surround ourselves with and the way we manage those relationships that need intervening. So in that sense, policing alone isn't going to change the way South Africans seek to solve their problems. but policing is important in signaling to all of us that it isn't up to us to use violence to solve our problems. There are other means to do this.
And Mpiwa, the police minister, noting that awareness campaigns on gender-based violence and femicide must be intensified. Private sector and gender activist organizations must work together with government to defeat the scourge and expose perpetrators in this regard. From the work that you do, would you say that we are winning the battle here?
I wouldn't say that we are winning the battle as yet. There is a lot of work that still needs to be done. I mean, the statistics, if there's anything to go by, is we can see statistics on contact crimes where we find the sexual harassment, sexual violence in.
We seem to have lost Mpiwa. Andrew, let me come to you where firearm amnesty is concerned, so that deadline extended to the 1st of August. And, of course, illegal firearms, noting there the police minister that they remain a major contributor to crime levels in the country. In terms of the interventions that government has gone through with the firearm amnesty, some gains have been made. But is it enough to rid our streets of guns?
I think an amnesty is a good move. As you point out, firearms are central to our inability to put a cap on violent crime in South Africa. In recent years, we've seen an increase in the proportion of murders that have been caused by firearms as in comparison to sharp instruments and blunt instruments. In the past, we saw far more knives and stabbings and bricks and things, and we're seeing more firearms now. The spread of illegal firearms, the markets of illegal firearms are things that police should be able to tap into, infiltrate, use intelligence, and to clamp down on. So I think it is important that police keep the illegal firearm trade in its sights and ideally make more progress, because we can significantly reduce violence, I think, by getting a better control on firearms in the country.
Would you say that police resources in the country are optimally used?
That's difficult to say. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's vital that resources are targeted in the right places at the right times and to the right activities. So I think the South African Police Service has made a concerted effort in recent years to capacitate police stations where harm is greatest, to get more police working over weekends rather than during the week. But whether that means more should not be done, I'm not sure. I think that we could probably make better use of our resources. We could probably hold police accountable for more narrowly targeted, narrowly defined objectives, rather than expecting them to address everything. We can give them very fine targets and hold them accountable to those, so that the resources are as finely tuned and targeted as possible, and therefore most likely to have the impact we desire.
Sure. And just a point of clarity on my part on an earlier question that I asked you. So vigilantism accounted for 13%, armed robberies for 11%, and gang-related violence accounted for 905 killings. Now, those are the correct statistics and not what I had mentioned a little bit earlier on. A big thank you to both my guests, Mpiwa Mangwiro-Tsanga, Regional Campaigns and Advocacy Specialist for Sonke Gender Justice, as well as Andrew Faull. He's a senior researcher at Justice and Violence Prevention at the Institute for Security Studies.